You are listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I interview authors of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. I'm your host, Alan Peterson, and this is episode number 92. So I'm recording this intro on Tuesday, March 24th, 2020. Needless to say, the world has got a bit crazy in the last few weeks. Here in San Francisco, we've been in a city order shelter-in-place edict going on 2 weeks now. So aside from going out to get some exercise, some fresh air, walking the dogs, or to hit the grocery store, my wife and I have been pretty much staying indoors. She set up office space in the dining room while I'm in my usual writing space office here in our house. We're lucky. We're doing well. And it hasn't been that bad working from at home for both of us, and our 2 dogs are loving it. I hope things are going well for you and your family and your loved ones too. Hopefully this podcast can offer you some respite from all that's going on out there. But I did want to read this quick PSA. So we all know that COVID-19, better known as coronavirus, has spread throughout the world. There are a few ways to help lower the spread of the respiratory disease. Wash your hands, avoid touching your face, including mouth, nose, and eyes. Cover your coughs and sneezes. Monitor your symptoms and consult with your doctor. Stay home and away from other sick people except for medical care. And clean and disinfect high-touch surfaces. For more information, please visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. Okay, let's get back to the podcast. In this episode, I interviewed the internationally best-selling author of the ORPHAN X books, Gregg Hurwitz. I've been a big fan of his books and of that series, so I was very excited when he agreed to come on to the podcast. So here we go, episode number 92 with Gregg Hurwitz. Well, hi, everybody. This is Alan with Meet the Thriller Author, and on the phone, I have Gregg Hurwitz. So happy to have you on the podcast. How are you doing today, Gregg?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for coming on. So I wanted to ask you right off the bat. So what made you to start writing?
Oh, man. It's the only way that my brain ever worked. So when I was a kid, we were not allowed to watch television in my house, which was a travesty. I was so upset about it. But what that meant was that we just read all the time, my sister and I. We'd go to the library, check out books that just, stacked up all the way to our chins. And so reading was sort of it was a perfect match for the way that my brain functioned. I thought in stories, and I still remember having a conversation with my sister when I was a kid, because I wrote my first little mysteries and illustrated them with crayons when I was in 5th grade. And I remember asking her when she was going to write her book, because I just assumed that anybody who loved stories would want to be a writer also, because it was just the only way that I ever sort of encountered or filtered the world. And she, she's now a doctor, and she kind of looked at me sideways and said, well, no, I just like reading. I don't actually want to be a writer. So I think it was just the default, the factory issue software default for my brain.
Yeah, and you have a very impressive academic background. I was reading on your website you have a master's in Shakespearean tragedy. Is that from all that love to reading, you just wanted to, when you decided to go to school, you went into that type of those studies?
Yeah, well, I was in undergrad. I studied English and psychology because I thought that would be the best combination of, fields of study. It's always funny, like when you look back, when I was doing it, I was just choosing the things that I loved the most and that interested me the most. But I look back in hindsight, I did a lot of work with Freud and Jung and Shakespearean tragedy. And of course, with Freud, you read his the case studies that he wrote up, and they're like these perfect little short stories, right? And Carl Jung never really wrote, everything he wrote about was about story and storytelling. Joseph Campbell, is sort of like just the Cliff Notes of Jung. And then you look at Shakespearean tragedies, and they're among the first thrillers. They're these very structured, convention-bound tales of lust, intrigue, and murder, right, that are based on sort of themes and motifs that were already familiar to him. And so when I just chose all these things because I really love them. But when I look back on it, in hindsight, it all made sense that I was obviously following all these things that I love into my, into this field that I work in.
And so you always, ever since you were young, you've been wanting to be a writer. It's always been in the back of your head, even when you're going through these studies?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I started my first novel when I was 19. I was an undergrad. Oh. And I had a lot of luck early and, sold it when I was, I think 22, 23 years old maybe. And so, I was given a very fortunate opportunity to be able to write full-time almost right out of school.
And was your first novel? Was it also in this thriller type genre? Or?
Yeah, it was called The Tower. I wrote parts of it. I wrote when I was 19 years old, and it's funny because on the one hand, I was so fortunate to be able to get that first book published, and by the other hand, it's like no one should ever be held accountable for anything that they thought when they were 19. And I have some stuff published from that age. It was a very dark, twisty little serial killer novel called The Tower.
And were you always a fan of the genre as a reader?
Yeah, I mean, I was heavy into Stephen King. When I was in 5th grade, I remember reading under my bed with a flashlight. Salem's Lot, in particular, just scared the hell out of me. I loved Pet Sematary, that whole early run. I was very into Peter Benchley, too, who wrote Jaws and The Island and The Deep. So I was very much drawn to stuff that was twisty and turny and dark. And Stephen King in particular was a very big influence. I remember just thinking how amazing it was that he could put this, combination of familiar words down in an unfamiliar way on the page and elicit so much emotion in me. I thought it was the kind of magic trick I wanted to learn.
Yeah, I love his book on writing. That's such a great book for aspiring writers. Yeah. So you've written... I didn't realize you'd written comic books, screenplays. You've written just in all the mediums out there. Do you find the approach, is it similar, or is it very different when you're writing like for a comic book or a screenplay or a novel?
Well, they're all different muscles. I mean, it helps very much to be in shape overall. But, writing a comic's a bit of a different muscle than writing a script is different than writing a TV pilot. So they draw on different things, but they can all inform each other. And obviously what underscores them all, the foundations, are understanding of character and tone and language. Those are common, but there's different constraints and different opportunities in all the forms.
So Into the Fire is the latest ORPHAN X novel. I love that series. Can you tell us, for listeners if they're not familiar with the latest, can you tell us about Into the Fire?
Yeah, well, ORPHAN X is the character who's the protagonist of my last 5 books, and he was taken out of a foster home at the age of 12 and trained in a very dark program in the DoD to be a government assassin because they were trying to take these kids and train them to be fully dispensable weapons, and he became an amazing assassin, all sorts of training, and at a certain point left the program, went on the run from the government who trained him and who now needs him dead because he doesn't just know where all the bodies are buried. He buried most of them himself. And now he's got this 1-800 number. It's 1-855 to nowhere, which you can call yourself. And people who are in desperate need can get a hold of this phone number and they call him. And when they call him and he answers, he will come to help people who have nowhere else to turn. And so Into the Fire is the newest, and the phone rings, and it's a guy who called him. His name is Max Merriweather. And Max had gotten an envelope from his very successful cousin. He's sort of the black sheep in a big family with lots of successful business people. And his cousin gives him this envelope and says, look, if anything ever happens to me, open this envelope. Which is a story that we've all seen a bunch of times. And what usually happens is the hero goes on and vanquishes his foes, and you never have to think about the poor bastard who got this envelope. But in my story, what happens is his cousin is brutally murdered, and Max opens the envelope, and it contains a single key. And through a series of events, he gets a hold of that 1-855 to nowhere phone number, and he calls Evan, and Evan comes in to help him because there's this crew of people who are murdering their way to Max, and Evan has to figure out how to protect him and find out what the hell is going on. And it's a book that starts really small and intimate, and then what Evan's confronting, it's like the mask keeps sliding off to reveal something bigger and more ominous beneath, and so the stakes just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I set a challenge for myself with this book to put him in the most dangerous and precarious position he's ever been in the series. And sure enough, that happens right around chapter 44 here. He winds up in a position that, I wrote him into the kind of corner that I wasn't sure if I could write my way out of.
Yeah, I was going to say, you really put, not that he's had to walk in the park in the other books, but you really put him through the ringer on this one.
That's right. Yeah, this one's pretty brutal. And there's a lot of, one of the things that interests me so much with ORPHAN X is that he's a character who lives in the real world with you and I. So we never get to see James Bond go home or Jason Bourne have an awkward encounter, right, with a single mother and, or get pulled into an HOA meeting in the condo he lives in. And so Evan is one of these archetypal characters who I grew up loving, like Jack Reacher or Joe Pike or, Bond or Bourne. But he lives in the same world that we do. And so the vacillation between that sort of classic lone wolf assassin type character contrasted with him trying to figure out how to function in everyday life is where a lot of the fun of the series comes for me.
Yeah, that's what really blew me away when I first read ORPHAN X was that because you really don't, like you mentioned, you don't read that in the other novels, and he dealing with Mia's son and it's like everyday life. Was that something that you, before you started to write the series or the first book, were you thinking about that from the beginning?
Well, I took a lot of time. I had a concept for this book, but I was a little bit afraid of it, and I wanted to wait. I wrote like 3 or 4 other books first and just let it keep percolating on a back burner because I really wanted to write something that I thought might be worthy of being on a shelf with these characters we love, like Jack Reacher or Harry Bosch. And that was one of the breakthrough realizations that I had, was I wanted him to, he's OCD, he lives his life by the assassin's 10 commandments. But I thought, what about if we meet him right when he's trying to kind of shatter through the way he's always lived and the rules that have always bound his life? And he's trying to shatter through into a new understanding of himself. And that's constantly contrasted with these interactions he has with the single mother district attorney who lives downstairs from him, who he's got chemistry with. But if she ever knew what he did for a living, she'd have to arrest him. And she's got an 8-year-old boy, Peter, who's very much in his, has echoes of his own kind of foster home / orphan upbringing. And there's all these different opportunities to hold these mirrors up to him as he's trying to forge his way to a new understanding and to try to learn, what the strange language is of intimacy that he never had in his life before. So there's a lot more room for some of that texture, I think. And when I realized that was a key component of the series, I was finally ready to start typing in earnest.
Do you do a lot of, do you outline your stories beforehand, or do you start writing these? Or?
Not in full. I have a sort of rolling outline, as I call it, which is just a big collection of bullet points. And I kind of shape up the next chunk of what I'm writing out of the clay of that outline as I go. So the outline tends to live and breathe and grow along with the book that I'm writing until at the end, it's all been absorbed into the novel. So I need to keep the outline and the outline stage sort of fluid throughout the writing to make sure that I always have room to respond and to learn more from the story and the characters as I'm writing them.
And also, I had read that you do a lot of research. Like you actually have fired all the weapons that Evan has fired. So every book you put in a lot of research beforehand. Yeah,
I did. I did a lot of mixed martial arts fighting. To train for that, which is not to imply I'm any good at it. I mostly, go get banged around a lot. But yeah, I feel like if I go out into the field and experience everything myself, I can write about it with the kind of telling detail and a sort of patina of verisimilitude that really puts the reader there and gives them a front row seat to the action. So that when I'm writing about a gun or a fight or, hacking or a location or anything that I get into, if I've kind of experienced it myself, I feel like I can write about it in a way that doesn't just make it a conglomeration of all the types of scenes that we might have seen before in popular culture. It helps me make it more specific and to bring the reader, to kind of help carry the reader across the suspension of disbelief.
Just a quick break here. I want to let you know about a special offer that Amazon is running now, which is very timely for so many of us that are staying at home. So Amazon is giving away 2 free months of the Kindle Unlimited membership instead of the usual 30-day trial. The Kindle Unlimited trial gives you access to over 1 million books, audiobooks, and current magazines, and you don't have to own a Kindle e-reader device. You can access your membership on any device that has the Kindle app. When your 2-month trial ends, you can renew your membership for $9.99 per month if you want. You can learn more about that at thrillingreads.com/Kindle60. That is my affiliate link, which is a great way to support that podcast by ordering via my link, thrillingreads.com/Kindle60. And that's the number 60. It's not spelled out. So thanks for listening, and back to the interview with Gregg Hurwitz. And so Evan's a big fan of the artisanal vodka. Is that was that a little piece of you, or does that come from the research?
If it was me, it would have been bourbon, because I'm primarily a bourbon drinker. But Evan he's very OCD, and so the vodka represents a real kind of cleanliness for him. It's the purest spirit, and so it's almost like an atonement ritual for him, of a way that he's got the cleanest apartment. There's no smudges anywhere on any of the counters. He's unbelievably meticulous and fastidious, and vodka is the alcohol that most does that. And so, that's at the end of the day, everything that I do has to be in service of the story. It can't just be the things that I like the most personally, and that's what suits him the best. And so what's cool is when I write about some of these vodkas, the sales in their companies go up. I mean, they manage to sell more. So I get lots of gifts from vodka companies around the world of some of the world's finest vodkas, which is not a bad perk.
Yeah, that's a cool bonus.
Of writing a series like this one.
Yeah, because I've done the same thing when I read the books. I go Google the vodka.
Yeah, well, you should try some of them. Yeah. They're really good. Are you a vodka drinker yourself?
No, not really. I'm more of a beer guy than wine. But yeah, but yeah, the way you describe it though is chilled. The ice when it's chilled and all that. Yeah, it makes me like, I should actually start trying these again.
Yeah, well, give it a go.
Yeah.
Time.
Yeah. So I had read now that ORPHAN X is being developed into a TV series. Is that any updates on that?
I'm working on that right now. I'm working with a screenwriter called Derek Kolstad, who created the John Wick franchise, and we're trying to figure out how to carve it out in a TV. So I'm working hard on that right now. It's still in the development stage, so as soon as that gets further along, I'll be posting updates. And you can find me on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all those places. So I'll be updating that as it goes.
Yeah, that'd be great. And I read too that you're also working on one of your The Sweet Girl with Jason Momoa, Marisa Tomei. Can you tell us anything about that?
Yeah, that's already shooting. That'll be out from Netflix in the first quarter of 2021. And that's a screenplay I wrote with a screenwriter called Philip Eisner. It's the first thing I ever co-wrote. He wrote a movie called Event Horizon. He's a magnificent screenwriter. And we worked on this thing together, and we sold it about a year ago, and it's already through production now. It's in post. Jason Momoa, Marisa Tomei. It's a great little cast, and it'll be kind of a dark revenge thriller from Netflix.
No, that sounds awesome. Do you when you're working like on a screenplay, do you go back and forth like writing a book and then working on a screenplay, or is it one at a time?
Well, sometimes I prefer to do them one at a time, but between this and the TV, the script, the comics, the other work, I don't fully have the luxury of being able to just focus on one thing at a time in full anymore. But I try and do it for stretches as long as I can manage.
And so what's next for you and for Evan Smoke?
Well, if you read Into the Fire, you know that the last three words sort of put everything we thought we knew about him and his world into question. And so we're going to be figuring out and seeing where he goes from there. But that was something that the end of Into the Fire is probably the biggest cliffhanger of any book I've ever written in terms of the whole plot is resolved, but it opens up a whole new kind of understanding of this character. And so we got to see where that's going to take us.
Yeah, what's been the feedback from the readers, from your fans about that? Excited about the new chapters coming?
It's been a wonderful. It was a great book tour. The reaction's been great. The reviews have been great. I got to see a lot of readers. It's been very exciting for me to go out and see this character I thought up kind of taking hold out there in the world. It's immensely gratifying. It's what we always hope for as writers. So it's been a really great run, especially with the reception of this book.
Yeah, your book's been published in like so many different languages. I mean, that was going to be surreal to see it in all these different languages. And
Yeah, it's pretty special.
Yeah. Before I let you go, any advice for aspiring writers out there who are listening?
Well, for your first draft, do not let perfection be the enemy of the good. You know, as other people have remarked, you can't fix a blank page. So give yourself permission to just get down a vomit draft, no matter how bad. You can always make it better. And it's really about carving out the time, making that time sacrosanct. Like, there's always going to be other things that are more important or more pressing or more urgent than working on a novel, it seems, or working on day 32 of 400 to write a rough draft of a novel or whatever it is. And you just have to determine that time is sacred and be selfish and guarding and protecting it.
All right, Greg. Well, thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed reading Into the Fire. It's out now. Really highly recommend it to other listeners.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Meet the Thriller Author podcast. Be sure to visit thrillerauthors.com to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover great thrilling reads. If you enjoy the podcast, I'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review to it, wherever it is that you're listening to this podcast, be it iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, wherever it is that you're listening to this right now. I would appreciate it. And please do check out my own thriller novels over at my website at alanpeterson.com. Until next time.